Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Standing Committee on Education and Economic Growth for Tuesday, November 3rd. I'd like to welcome my colleagues Corey Deagle, Lynn Lund, Heath McDonald, Ernie Hudson, Ola Hammerland, Robert Henderson, and Corey is in today for James Albert. Could I get someone to move the adoption of the agenda? Lynn Lund. So today we are, and of course, welcome to our guests today. We'll be receiving a briefing on rural internet access and where we are with that to date. And so with us today we have Paul Godfrey, the Director of Infrastructure from the Department of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy, and from the Department of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture we have Erin McGrath-Gaudet, Deputy Minister, and Maigan Newson, the Project Manager of Corporate Projects. So we'll let you take it away and we'll save our questions till the end. Usually there's no burning questions that we need to interrupt for, so unless we have a burning question, we'll save them till the end. So take it away.
Perfect. Thank you, Ms. Bernard. I would like to thank you for inviting us here this afternoon to provide an update on rural broadband. So as you had mentioned, we did put together a presentation, and then we're happy to answer any questions after the presentation. So there are two main items that we will provide an update on this afternoon. The first will be the agreements with Bell and Explorenet, and the second will be the PEI Broadband Fund. The agreements were signed with Bell and Explorenet in March 2020 to enhance and expand broadband services to households across the province. The Department of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy will provide some details pertaining to the funding agreements for these projects, and then I will provide some information on the service delivery side of things that is looked after by the Department of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture. I did want to note that there is further information and any updates on the province's website at princeedwardeisland.ca/internetplan. The Department of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture also administers the PEI Broadband Fund through Innovation PEI. There are 5 streams administered through this funding program, and we will review each of those. And similarly, further information on the program can be found at princeedwardeisland.ca/PEIBF. So I'll let Paul speak to this slide.
Okay, so again, my name's Paul Godfrey with Department of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy. So thanks again to the committee today to invite us here, and happy to come and present to you. So I'm going to talk briefly about a federal program that we have that funds what we're referring to as the province's internet plan. So our department, TIE, administers federal infrastructure programs, largely those that are delivered through Infrastructure Canada, but there are some others too. One of those programs is called the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, or ICIP for short. It's a 10-year program. It launched in 2018. It funds a broad range of infrastructure types, but one of those is broadband. So our department worked closely with staff of the Department of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture over the last couple of years to explore opportunities to fund broadband projects on PEI. And through an RFP process that EGTC led, Bell and Explorenet projects were selected for our ICIP program. So the Bell and Explorenet projects were identified under ICIP, or approved under ICIP in March 2019. So there is a maximum federal cost share for those projects under that program of 50%. So the feds could share up to 50%. You can see the amounts for each of the projects there. So there is a difference between total costs and eligible costs. Some costs aren't eligible for the ICIP program. For instance, land costs, internal employee salaries and so forth aren't eligible for the program. So focusing on the eligible costs of each project, Bell's eligible cost is $35.7 million, approved in 2019. Federal share of that would be 17.9. The province is kicking in 3.6 million, and the applicant is picking up the balance. With Explorenet, 38.1 million eligible cost as approved under ICIP, with the federal share being 15.2 million, no provincial share. They didn't seek in excess of 50% of funding for the project, so the federal share covered it, what they were asking for, and they cover, again, the balance of that. So we signed funding agreements with each of these applicants in early 2020, and the projects are underway. Those funding agreements are between the province and the applicants. They cover such things as the funding amounts, the eligible and ineligible costs, defining those, environmental assessments that are required, Aboriginal consultation, duty to consult requirements, claims process and timelines, a lot of reporting requirements that the province has to satisfy with the federal government. We get that information from the applicants on a regular basis, multiple times a year. Reporting requirements, of course, go further than just fiscal. You have to report on progress and other aspects of the projects as they go along, just to make sure progress is being made. Also insurance requirements, communications protocol, a number of things covered in those agreements. So basically, TIE's job is to make sure the funding flows to the applicants and that the projects are moving forward and following the terms of the funding agreement, which directly ties back to a bilateral agreement that the province has with the federal government for the ICIP program. I'll turn it back over to Maigan to continue.
Thank you, Paul. So complementary to the funding agreement, the Department of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture, EGTC, holds a service delivery agreement with each company. So this service delivery agreement helps to formalize the reporting structure for these two large projects. The service delivery side of things was incorporated into the funding agreement by reference. So this agreement really allows the province to ensure we are understanding the project as it rolls out, and that we can ask questions along the way. The deliverables for both projects meet and actually exceed the standards laid out by CRTC, which is the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission. The CRTC has a universal service objective that Canadians have access to broadband speeds of at least 50 megabytes per second download and 10 megabytes per second for uploads. Now, in 2016, the CRTC included some criteria for measuring their universal service objective. One of the measurements was that the CRTC expects fixed broadband internet access services to be available in 90% of Canadian premises by the end of 2021, and in the remaining 10% of Canadian premises within 10 to 15 years. In terms of specifics for these projects, Bell Canada will serve 13 communities across the province. Funding will be provided to deliver fixed wired fiber service to 9,422 households. Funds are not dispersed until progress has been confirmed on these projects. Project completion is expected to be July 2021. Now, there are currently 2 communities with completed projects, Tignish and Surrey. Some communities are being completed in phases. This is because there are various fiber exchanges that serve a community. So one community, subdivision, or road doesn't necessarily share that same exchange. So we are seeing some communities completed in phases. Right now, the communities of Cove Head, Rustico, Charlottetown, and Hunter River have phase 1 completed. Most of the fiber placement for the Bell project is planned to be aerial along the joint use pole lines. This requires significant prep work before the fiber can actually be strung along those poles. Some of the prep work that may be required includes the replacement of the utility poles along the corridor, as well as the trimming of trees. Generally speaking, 60 meters is the maximum span that can be between the utility poles. In areas where Bell is using joint use poles with Maritime Electric, that span is much smaller. So if you see any crews out on the road replacing poles, likely working on the Bell project. in terms of progress on this project, between June and end of September of this year, about 4,000 households have been connected to fiber. And we can expect to receive an update on this number in the next 2 to 3 weeks. As I had mentioned, updates are provided online on our website. Looking at Explorenet, this project will serve 20,000 households, 17,000 of which will receive service through fixed wireless towers, and 30,000 of which will receive service through fixed wired fiber to the home. Project completion for the wireless phase is spring 2021. Project completion for fiber is November 2023. Now, one thing I'd like to point out is initially with this project, the fiber phase was to be completed first, but those phases have now switched, so this way more households can get connected quicker. They don't have to wait until the end of the project. The fiber that Explorenet will be constructing will offer enhanced broadband capacity, so it will be connecting to the towers, both existing and new towers. At the completion of the Explorenet project, service available to households will be 100 megabytes per second download and up to 10 megabytes per second upload. Explorenet currently has 21 fixed wireless towers across the province, and they have been and will continue to upgrade the equipment on these towers to provide enhanced service and enhanced capacity from these towers. They will also be constructing 8 new fixed wireless towers. Among the approvals required in this process, there's a land use agreement and approval from TransCanada and NAV Canada. In terms of the upgrades to existing towers, the process looks a little different depending on each tower. The upgrade and testing of the equipment itself does not take a substantial amount of time, but when a tower is owned by another company, there is a review process that must take place. So when a tower is owned by another company, this is called a co-location, a colo tower. Now, there are 6 sites that will be completed with upgrades by December, so residents will see enhanced capacity and enhanced services for those that currently are accessing the service. However, there are other sites that will be receiving upgrades beyond this timeline, again, due to that review process if they are located on a tower that is owned by another company. So just to give you a little bit of an idea on the process required when upgrading equipment on a co-location tower. So the company would request space on the tower, additional space on the land, right-of-way conduits, for example. The owner of the tower would take that request and provide the asking company with a conditional letter of offer. On this letter, there's a few requirements, one of which would be that an engineering firm would need to complete a review of that particular tower. So the engineers would take a look at the current equipment on that tower as well as the proposed additional and ensure that the tower can actually handle the capacity of that equipment. The findings from the engineer would be provided to the owner of the tower for review, and if the engineering review is satisfactory and no further information is required, the tower owner would then issue the final letter of approval to the asking company, and at this point the company can go ahead into their upgrades. The next item we wanted to provide an update on is the PEI Broadband Fund. This program was launched in September 2019 with a budget of $2 million per year over 5 years. So the total budget for this program is $10 million. There are 5 streams available through the funding program. So these streams, as you can see on the slide here, quite a few of them are at the 50% level funding. So these streams were set up using a 50% funding model. This is the same model that was used for the previous request for proposals that resulted in the agreement with Bell and Explorenet that Paul had mentioned. So this program provides funding to install infrastructure that will provide enhanced broadband services to a specific area. Depending on the applicant as well as the solution would determine which stream is used. We did see a total of 4 businesses that have used the business stream, and a total of 2 internet service providers, also known as ISPs, that have used the stream. We have not seen too much uptake on the community stream either, so that is something that we're taking a look at. But then the next 2 slides, we're going to go into the last 2 streams a little bit more. Those are new streams that we have developed, I guess, at the end of the summer based on evaluation of the existing programs. So the first one that I'll go into a little bit more detail on is the residential stream. So this stream provides 100% funding up to a maximum of $5,000 for wireless equipment at a primary residence. So the equipment is to help households experiencing signal impediments such as mature tree coverage, or if there's a hilly terrain in the area, to help capture that wireless signal. Some households will still require this infrastructure upon completion of the 2 larger projects, but most of them should be able to access that signal without this help. But this program really helps people get connected right now, and that was a goal going into the evaluation of the program, that we wanted to get as many residents connected to reliable broadband services as soon as possible. The original allocation for the stream was $350,000 from the annual Broadband Fund budget. Now, there was a significant uptake in this program, so our department had reached out to at the time there were 20 projects that were complete, so we had reached out to the 20 individuals, and the feedback that we received was that they were experiencing a significant increase in speeds, and they were able to do more work, education, entertainment from home. There was only one individual that was experiencing some issues with equipment, and we did arrange for the internet service provider to make sure that that was fixed. So based on the feedback that we did receive, we went back to Treasury Board and requested an additional $500,000 from our Innovation PEI Contingency Fund. So to date, we have received 264 applications through the residential stream. As we can see on the slide here, it does provide the number of applications that we've received across PEI. So we can see that islanders from various communities are making use of this program. The next stream that I wanted to give a little bit more detail on is the accelerated ISP stream, so accelerated internet service provider stream. So as I had mentioned, initially the Broadband Fund was set up with a 50% funding model, and similarly with the internet service provider stream, the initial stream, 50% funding was what was being offered to the service providers. But we weren't getting a lot of uptake, so we did look at making some changes to this program. In July, discussions were held with the local internet service providers to determine what changes were required with this program to ensure that they could access the funds. This program here, the Accelerated Internet Service Provider Stream, was designed based on the feedback that we received in our discussions with the service providers. In August, a call for applications, was released for the Accelerated Internet Service Provider Stream. The application was open for a period of 2 weeks, which the local internet service providers did feel was reasonable. For the stream, a total of $1 million from the PEI Broadband Fund budget was allocated. Project funding for each application was available at 90% as opposed to the original 50%. The Accelerated was providing 90% for a total maximum contribution of $150,000 of eligible costs for each project. Conditional approval was also available for those seeking funds from other sources. In our discussions, many local internet service providers did indicate that they had projects ready to go or projects in mind. And also, in light of COVID-19, we see so many more people working from home and educating from home that really need that enhanced, reliable internet service at their premise. So as a result, a project completion date of December 31, 2020 was attached to the stream in an effort to get households connected as soon as possible, especially, as I had mentioned, when we know more people are working and educating from home. With the accelerated internet service provider stream, a total of 7 proponents received conditional approval. So the map that we see here on the screen provides an approximate visual of where infrastructure is proposed to be either enhanced or expanded. Proposed projects with conditional approval include the installation of fiber to 3 key towers in residential and commercial sites along the paths in the Richmond, Grand River, Sunnyside, Arlington, and Birch Hill areas. There are proposed additions and upgrades to a number of mast and pole sites to subscribers in the Chelton, Fernwood, Lower Bedeck, Augustine Cove, and Victoria area. In the Wood Islands, Pinette, and Southern Kings area, there is a proposed upgrade to equipment on existing towers to provide service to residents in that area. In the Hope River Springton area, there is proposed installation of 3 new towers to serve the subscribers. There is proposed installation and replacement of 2 towers at the Toronto Road and Springbrook area that could offer upgraded and expanded service to subscribers. There is a proposal to upgrade current equipment and materials on Charlottetown and Somerville towers, so that would offer enhanced service to existing subscribers, as well as a proposal to provide wireless service to residents in the Lot 16, Wellington, Abrams Village, Cape Edgemont, and Mount Carmel area. So with these proposed projects, there's a total number of approximately 2,000 subscribers that could be hooked up with these projects. And to date, as I had mentioned, that they are conditionally approved. Just looking ahead, I just wanted to make it clear the role of the Department of EGTC is to help navigate islanders to service in their area. When inquiries are received from the public, department reps provide information on what providers may be in the area. The residents would have to follow up with those providers to determine the exact coverage in their area. This is particularly important when we're looking at wireless. But essentially, you know, it is consumer choice. As the department, we are just helping islanders navigate what is out there. This winter, we will be holding conversations with the internet service providers to evaluate the accelerated internet service provider stream that I had mentioned at the 90%. There is an interest in running this program again. However, we would need to evaluate the effectiveness and make sure that the program is working. In terms of projects that the province is not funding, but we will be rolling out, I did want to mention Starlink, which I'm sure we've all heard a thing or two about Elon Musk's satellite internet service. So we have reached out for further information on this project, but essentially Starlink is targeting service in northern US and Canada in 2020 according to their website, and then hoping to expand to near global coverage throughout 2021. So what they're going to be doing is launching thousands of satellites, low orbit satellites, to connect residents to that wireless service. On a few weeks ago, Starlink did receive CRTC licensing, but they still do need licensing from Innovation Science and Economic Development Canada. Recently, a CNBC article had reported information on the service, but as I said, we have reached out for further information to confirm. The other project that I did want to mention that the province is not funding but will have impact on services available to Islanders is a Bell Wireless project. So on October 19th, Bell had released a news release, and as I said, details are less than usual on this one as we are a funder, but we have reached out for more information. So with Bell Wireless, they announced that they are looking to help Atlantic Canadians, about 70,000 locations in Atlantic Canada, help them receive high-speed internet by end of 2020. They're looking at a total of 200,000 locations in Atlantic Canada over the next 2 years. So with Bell Wireless, the expectation is that they will be using their existing mobile network and putting new equipment on their cell towers. This is different than their existing DSL service or fiber service. It would be service from towers. They had mentioned that 27,000 of the residents that they're looking to connect are from Prince Edward Island. And approximately 70% of homes that they're planning to connect will have access to speeds up to 50 megabytes per second download and 10 megabytes per second upload. As I had mentioned, it's delivered over their wireless network, so it is different from their DSL, but they are running off their existing mobile towers. And the last thing that I did want to convey is just that it's really important to remember that these large infrastructure projects that we're going to see rolling out over the coming months and coming year are really kind of paving the way. They're building capacity. Not only they're serving Islanders right now, but they are building the capacity so that we can see further upgrades in the future and also reselling of the broadband that they're bringing into the province as well. Yeah, so I think that's it for a presentation. So I'm sure there's a few questions.
Great, thank you very much. Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much for your presentation today. This has been really helpful. You actually answered a number of questions that I had been writing down for myself as you continued along, so I do appreciate the work that went into this presentation. One question that comes up for me, I've mentioned to Deputy Minister McGrath-Gaudet before that access to internet is not something I hear about a lot in Summerside, but the cost of internet is. And I know that CRTC has indicated that access to internet is, of course, a basic necessity, but a main barrier to that can be affordability. And I'm just wondering, perhaps this would be in concert with the Minister's Department, who's beside me here, but is there any thoughts to looking at ways to make internet affordable for low-income families who might be experiencing barriers?
So certainly part of what we're hoping with the consumer choice is to add some more competition to the marketplace so that it is more affordable. We don't currently have any ability to regulate the cost of service, and you know, there would be risks kind of going down that road. If you don't have it, I will get the information. There's a federal program that is out there. I'll get some details, but it's a bit of a lottery draw for lower income families that they can receive, I think, subsidized service through the federal government, but I'll grab those details and I'll send them to you.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. I was not familiar with that, so I would definitely appreciate getting that information. But that's sort of along the lines that I was thinking. I'm not sure we want to head down the road of regulating the rates specifically, but I do think of other areas in which we offer subsidies like rent and things like that. So I was wondering if there's any thought of the provincial government going in that direction, and I can appreciate that, in all fairness, that may not be a stream that you would be able to speak to specifically, but I'd be curious to the federal side of that. The flip side, I've heard from a number of businesses who have found the cost of internet particularly unreasonable. Now, granted, more often than not, they're outside of Summerside. But when they wish to upload videos to promote what they're doing or want to reach their database, the amount of data that they are using is so significant that it's making their internet bills sky high. And I just wonder, through the economic side of things, if there's any thoughts on finding ways to support businesses.
Certainly, so we'd have to look at kind of particular instances for that one. I know in some cases it is the cost of installing some dedicated fiber lines, et cetera, for the business, and we can support that through the broadband fund. So when Maigan kind of referred to the streams before, we do have a business stream that they would be eligible for costs for that kind of capital side of it. It would be different on the service side. So I mean, we can certainly work with businesses to try and find some solutions on that front, but it's currently easier for us on the mechanisms that we do have to support on kind of that upfront build as opposed to the service side or monthly bills.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that answer. That's definitely a conversation I will consider bringing forward outside of this. I'm curious how COVID-19 has impacted your timelines.
So in terms of the big projects that we have, Bell has continued to roll out according to their schedule that was set out prior to COVID. So that has certainly been encouraging news. I mean, they would be deemed to be essential workers, and so they've had perhaps more flexibility than other industries would on that front. With Explorenet, we've had conversations, as Maigan had mentioned in the presentation. Initially, their plan was to proceed with the fiber build that would feed the towers, and then they would look to expand their coverage based on that. They have flipped that project now, so moving towards doing the wireless first and then the fiber, and that will enable us to kind of hook up, I think it's 17,000 civic addresses to wireless. The one caveat of that would be they won't have their full end of project speed right away, so they're looking to launch the wireless service with a 50 and 10 level of service, but once that fiber build is complete and they have greater bandwidth and capacity to feed their towers, it will go up to that 110.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just ask one more quick thing, and then if you want to go on to someone else, that's fine. But I was just curious, something that I heard a number of families say when we went into lockdown, that one of their significant challenges was not being able to access quality internet. Now, again, this didn't come up a lot in Summerside, but
It came up a lot in PEI.
yes, no, it did. So on the point of not being able to successfully navigate school, and I just wonder if in the event of another lockdown or a similar situation, has the province thought about using mechanisms such as hotspots as a way to rapidly connect people who are not being caught?
Yeah, so certainly one of the first things that we did when we were over the course of the summer and thinking of what eventualities may exist in the fall if a second wave or more shutdowns happened, and that was really kind of the impetus behind that residential access stream, that we knew probably the fastest way to hook people up right now was when there was wireless service in the area, but perhaps because of their location they weren't able to get it. So we saw that as being one solution that we could move out and roll out relatively quickly, and using that 100% funding mechanism so that that there wouldn't be that financial barrier for individual homeowners to hook on to that type of service. We are currently exploring kind of the hotspot model as well, of looking at some different locations that we may be able to leverage that would be in areas that we do have reliable service, but that then people would be able to kind of plug in if and as and when needed. So we are looking at that and hope to have a little bit more to announce on that in the next couple of weeks.
Robert?
Me next?
You're next. You're up.
Okay, as you were making some of that presentation, you talked a little bit about the residential pilot, and in my area, it mentioned there that you had 10 applicants in the O'Leary area for having the potential of getting the system set up. Is that 10 that have been approved, or 10 that's doable? Because one of the issues that I was getting, I haven't had one person actually call me to say that everybody, that they could get it. The issue was always that they just couldn't access to get the high-speed internet regardless. So I'm just wondering, is applicants the same as approvals that have the ability to get the high-speed internet?
We are approving them quite quickly. Maigan, do you have any more details on those 10, or we can always follow up?
Yeah, I don't have the exact details for the O'Leary area, but happy to follow up and see exactly how many have been approved and have followed through and are completed versus the resident has to reach out to the service provider to organize a time to come and install the equipment. But I'm happy to look into that for you specifically in that area.
Robert?
Yeah, just to kind of clarify, like I said, I did have, like, when the announcement came again, and I promoted it within my riding, and had a number of inquiries about it. like I say, everybody always came back to say that, no, it still doesn't work. It's no good for us, so we can't do it here. So that's why I'd want to get some clarity to that. But does that not seem like, even a 264 for all of PEI, does that not seem rather low? Or even 10 for the whole area? It seems like it's hardly making a scratch in the process.
Keep in mind, we've only had this open for a couple of months, too. This is a new program. And I will say it is, to a certain extent, limited by the capacity that is out there right now. This really only works if there's wireless signal in the area. So certainly in some of those areas that are more challenged, it doesn't create capacity. It just helps kind of connect some of the access to capacity that's already there. So it's not the be-all and end-all, but it to kind of earlier comment, it was what we could do quickly to help as many people as we could in the interim.
Robert?
But it's not the point. I mean, the whole problem that I seem to be seeing in my riding anyway, and it's a very rural riding, and when you had mentioned it maybe, 10% of the homes maybe 10 to 15 years away. I'm figuring my riding's included in that, is really what I'm expecting here. But that's the whole crutch of the problem, is we can't get access to any of the types of internet speeds. And if they can't, and let's say only 10 places that may even be applicants, it seems like we're a long ways where we really need to get to try to solve the problem in rural areas. So to me, that seems like a really low number. And like I say, I'm not educated enough on technology and these types of things to know whether it is or it isn't. But it seems like we're a long ways away from seeing the types of speeds and access to services that people are going to require, as is becoming a rather essential service, access to high-speed internet. So I go back, so my next question will be a little bit more, so how are you going to figure out then what areas you're going to tackle first? Are you going to look at an area like O'Leary first, or is it more likely to be an area that's last because it just has no real great infrastructure to be able to deliver that?
So what I may suggest we do is we can have a bit of a sit down. We can do up a map of your district in particular, both in terms of what we know about the Bell contracts rollout, the Explorenet rollout in your area. We're also trying to get some more details about the Bell wireless project and what their coverage will be for your area as well, and start to kind of pick off some of those pieces just so that you have a sense of what is happening and what you can expect in the next 6 months, 12 months for your particular area. Once we have those two big infrastructure projects complete, that will probably cover about 95% of the island. Wireless will be kind of a key part of that play for most rural areas. It's incredibly expensive to run fiber, and when you're looking at economies of scale, it makes more sense to do wire fiber in a project where you can hook up 10 or 20 or 30 civic addresses in a kilometer versus 1 or 2 or 3. But the wireless technology has certainly improved dramatically over the last number of years. So even with a wireless delivery, we are still seeing those CRTC level speeds. And then, you throw in wild cards like, Starlink and some of the satellite improvements as well. I'm cautiously optimistic, but, certainly it will always be the more rural, remote locations that are the hardest to serve. And that's, again, when we look at some of the residential access piece, we knew even once Explorenet rolled out completely, when we look at our map and the propagation study, you'll frequently see 1 or 2 or 3, civic addresses that are in a valley or a heavily wooded area, et cetera, that we still knew that those properties would be difficult. And that's when we needed to look at more kind of residential-based access solutions, like having a tower to capture that wireless in that area. So that's not really an answer to your question, but hopefully an explanation, and certainly happy to have follow-up conversations on that.
Robert?
So is this an issue of money, or is it an issue of technology? So I look at the point, if you've got about $74 million of the costs there, the province put in about 3.6 million, feds in 33.1 million. Would the province putting in more money speed this process up, I guess is where I'm coming from, and allow those service providers the opportunity to deliver those services in the more rural areas, which is what we're trying to deal with here, is they're the ones that can't get the access to the essential service to work out of their own home, to do education out of their own home. So I guess the question is it more a technology issue that there's no way it's ever going to happen because it's just the technology's not there, or is it the case more money would speed up the technology?
I don't, but at this point, I wouldn't say it's a technology issue so much. The technology does exist. I mean, there's always limitations with it. But I wouldn't suspect that PEI is going to be a big enough player in the marketplace that, specific technology is going to be developed that's special and unique for us. Every part of North America is dealing with similar issues. And I do, you do see the improvements in technology. Money can be part of the solution, but a lot of it still is capacity. I mean, these are massive, massive infrastructure investments. It's a heavily regulated field, so even in terms of some of our projects that involve wireless, I mean, going through regulatory hoops for building a tower do take time. The fiber builds require detailing and design. There is a lot of stuff that happens and even to kind of one of Maigan's earlier points, replacing some of the hydro poles in areas where they are too far apart to hang the telecommunications or the fiber. There's a lot of steps that are involved, so money can be part of the solution, but it really is a lot of the capacity that goes into these massive infrastructure projects that everything needs to line up to get it across the finish line.
Robert?
So why don't you put a bit more money into it? I mean, at $3.6 million is almost like a paltry amount. I mean, if you doubled that, would that speed it up by a year? Or?
Not with those two major projects that we have in play with the two major providers. They are in those steps of going through what regulatory requirements are needed, the design, the build itself. So with those major ones in play, in that case, throwing more money at it wouldn't make them happen faster. Part of what we did try to do with that broadband fund piece and why we moved to that 90% funded for the accelerated stream was to be able to work with some of our local providers to speed up some of that access. Those projects are, supposed to be completed by the end of the calendar year as well. So in those cases, we are trying to leverage what funding we can provide to provide some consumer choice, to support our local ISPs, and to get people connected in different areas of the province a little bit faster than perhaps some of these big projects will be able to do. And we're certainly open to looking at some of the federal funding that may be available if and when we need to or can to support other projects.
Robert?
I have more questions, but I'll let some others have a chance here.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. I guess we're going to go back and forth here. Actually, on the point that Robbie was making, I can completely appreciate the concern for people who fall into that 10% gap and how slow this is going to be. And I know that the community stream of revenue has been fairly slow to uptake, as I understand it. I'm just wondering, I'm thinking of examples like Pictou County and Alberta, where they've done community-based internet projects, community-based broadband, and I'm just wondering if there has been any thought or push towards helping communities do it themselves to make it happen a little faster.
I think you've touched on what we consider to be another area for us to do some further consultations on. The Broadband Fund had initially designed to basically match what had been done with the bigger contracts, doing that 50% funding. We have had interest from some communities that they might be able to leverage their gas tax money to support builds. We've also looked at, can we leverage some CRTC funding as well to support those builds? So it's certainly an area for further discussion, and we'd be open to having those conversations and seeing what we might be able to do.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. So in order for that to work, though, they'd have to already be an incorporated municipality, right, in order to have access to gas tax, and that's not what I was thinking of specifically. I was wondering if there's not opportunities for cooperatives or social enterprises. I know we've definitely seen communities in other places that have done this, where they have set up a cooperative as a body through which they could leverage some funding, and it allowed them to move forward at a faster pace than the province would be able to offer for a specific rural community. I'm just wondering if that might be a possibility that you'd be willing to explore.
Certainly willing to explore it, yeah.
Lynn?
Thank you. So on a different topic, the Bell Wireless Home Expansion project that was announced just last month, I'm just wondering if you could give me an overview on what that will mean for PEI.
So that is the wireless project. So we are a little bit limited in terms of details because we're not a funder in that particular situation. So Maigan, do you want to touch on the number of civics that are on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So Bell has indicated that they intend to reach a total of 200,000 locations within Atlantic Canada. 27,000 of that 200,000 will be on Prince Edward Island, and then they hope to reach 70,000 by the end of 2020.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. So what I was wondering is what's the relationship between this agreement and the province? But from what I understand, there isn't. And it doesn't have any impact on the agreement that's currently in place. No provincial funding. Any federal funding?
I don't think they have federal funding for that one either, but where we're not involved in it, I could be wrong on that, but my understanding was that there was no government funding from either the provincial or federal.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair.
Ernie?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and I'd like to thank the presenters for a great presentation, certainly from my perspective, very informative. Just to follow up on a comment that Rob had made there with regard to the number of applications, I believe it was 10 in his area, in O'Larry or thereabouts. But as we move forward and the projects of both Bell and Explorenet are completed, the accelerated ISP funds and the ones providers that access that, would you see that that the residential stream would continue on past that point? And I guess what I'm getting at is just to the point that, you know, if it's not there, it doesn't matter what you put forward in the residential stream as far as, infrastructure, what have you, you're not going to be able to access greater speeds. So once Explorenet, the Bell projects are completed, the accelerated ISP completed, do you see that at that point in time with the residential stream that it would continue and that it would probably have a greater uptake at that point in time? Or am I reading it wrong?
I will say cautiously, because currently right now we do have approval till the end of the fiscal for this pilot. But, you know, certainly we'll have to look at how we help residents access whatever wireless signal is there. As the Explorenet project and the Bell projects, the wireless Bell project roll out, we may not have the same demand for this with increased capacity and usage of different frequencies and a lot of technical things that I'm not the expert in. There may not be the same need for it as currently exists, that there may be greater coverage even without that type of equipment. That's certainly our hope, but there, as I said, when we did the propagation study, even then there were small pockets of houses based on tree coverage or topography that weren't able to access wireless signal based on that computer-generated map. So certainly, if we were to deviate from the current pilot, that will certainly be a need that we would continue to have to look at how we fill.
Ernie?
Thank you, Chair. You had referenced, I believe, that when these programs are all completed, that 95% of island households would have access to high-speed internet. The other 5%, are we looking? Is it being looked at now as to what potentially could be done for that 5%? Because if I'm in one of those percentages of that 5%, it's not a great deal of comfort to me if I can't get high speed.
Probably not O'Larry.
To be honest. Not in this particular case, actually. So when we looked at kind of where the bigger pattern spots were, a lot of it was kind of coastline area, and there were clusters around kind of the Chelton area, Fernwood area, Wood Islands, particularly, that those would be kind of two areas that we knew we were still going to have to work on coverage in those areas. With the accelerated ISP stream, we do have 2 projects that are proposed that actually do cover those particular areas. Part of the consultation process that we had with local ISPs, we did show them those propagation studies as well, so that they could see where there were potential for customers for themselves when they're thinking of their business case and expanding. In addition, I can't remember the Wood Islands area, but I know the Chelton Beach and Fernwood area was on the Bell map for their wireless coverage as well. I don't know if you, Maigan, have anything further on that.
No, not at this point. I'm just trying to think back on the Bell Wireless. As the Deputy Minister had said, we have reached out for further information. So, yeah, happy to take a look at those areas that are kind of those white spots in the map and see where these future projects might potentially be filling those gaps.
Really is kind of next stage for us now that we have these accelerated projects in, and now with the announcement of the Bell Wireless, and then what we already do know, we'll be kind of layering that map and seeing where those gaps will continue to exist. Like I said, where it makes sense for, you know, 1 or 2 or 3 houses, the most economical piece would be to do, you know, a tower so that they can access wireless for those particular properties. But where we see kind of clustering around a coastline or, you know, a particularly troublesome valley, we're committed to looking at solutions for those particular areas.
Ernie?
Yeah, just thank you, Chair, and more of an observation than anything. I am glad to hear that 5%, you're still looking at what can be done for them in those cases. So that's all for now, Chair. Thank you.
Robert?
I just wanted to kind of get into a little bit about some of our campgrounds. There was some ISP providers that were supposed to try to provide some Wi-Fi services in campgrounds. And I brought it up in the legislature a little bit, but I haven't really heard much of an update. So in Cedar Dunes and some of the other campgrounds, did that ever get resolved where Wi-Fi was available in our campgrounds? And I'll specifically ask about Cedar Dunes.
Yes, I think Cedar Dunes was the last one to be hooked up this year. But we are going out for RFP this winter, so we are going to do our level best this time to get the RFP out nice and early, give our local ISPs and other providers the opportunity to really kind of work on their detailed design and their proposals, and then have things set up so that everything can be installed this spring prior to those parks opening. But that is a commitment for all of the parks that have campgrounds, that wireless will be aimed to be up and running before parks open for camping next year.
Robert?
I'll just kind of wrap up with one last part, and it goes back to the maybe a little bit more what Ernie suggested about, you know, there are 5% of the homes that are projected still not to have access to service. I know, once again, in my district, and I know I'm joking a bit when saying we might be the only district, but I had a lot of students that wound up that they're going to have to study from home, post-secondary institutions, UPEI and Holland College and what. But because they did not have access to high enough speeds of internet in their home places in O'Leary, Inverness, they wound up having to move to Charlottetown or move closer to where they could get some access to the internet. So you did talk a little bit about the potential of some hotspots that may be able to access that. That sounds like a good idea. Do you have any sense of when that may be up and running and occurring? Because I'll have to go back to maybe the next semester, maybe the next break, where students would have an opportunity to maybe come back home and get close to home and not have the expenses that they have to have in rent and things of that nature that they wouldn't normally get. Now, I know there's a whole atmosphere about it being a post-secondary student, and you're sometimes not going to get that in O'Leary, Inverness, or at home, but it just seems like a disadvantage that some of my constituents seem to be having around that.
Certainly, and you wouldn't be unique in that situation. You know, a lot of rural areas where we do have people, and I do hear particularly from the post-secondary side of things where, you know, right now in PEI, I think we're fortunate enough that many of us can kind of get back into the office as needed. You know, if working from home it's not an option because of our speeds, but for post-secondary students, in many cases, they don't have that option. We are hoping in the next couple of weeks we'll have some locations that we could advertise as hotspots for people who find themselves in that situation, and looking to do that as a pilot for 6 months to see if what we can set up. But you know, certainly we'd be looking to have things in place before the next semester would hit. And like I said, certainly our hope is in the next few weeks we'll have more to share on that.
Robert?
Just elaborate on that a little bit. So what are you sensing that the setup will be so they have access? So is there going to be a fee that student will have to pay, or is it a reduced fee, or how is that going to work? Because once again, it has to be cost competitive to the cost of them renting in another location, right? So.
Certainly right now we're looking to kind of have it be a free access point for people, similar to what we would, you know, have at libraries and whatnot, that it would be something that would not include a fee for the users.
Thank you. No more questions for me, thanks.
Corey?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much for your presentation. Under these two major projects, how many people so far, how many civic addresses have been hooked up? Did they just say that?
4,000.
4,000.
For the Bell project, so the Explorenet one, we haven't got new customers hooked up on that piece yet. That would be the wireless completion spring of next year that we'd see people hooked up.
And that 5% map, the 5% that won't have it, do you have a map of that you would be able to share?
Certainly, so we do have them broken down by district, so we can share a map even of your particular district if that's of interest to you.
Yeah, and I know that
Yeah.
Maigan has been great to deal with and has been a very big help. And I know there is the maps kind of for each district of where Bell and whatnot we're going to cover.
Mm-hmm.
Does that include the people that won't, that 5%?
Anywhere there's a white space on that map, those are the civic addresses. So the civic addresses are kind of the black dot, but
Yeah.
anywhere that's in a white area, those are the areas that we still have to look at how we can support them in coverage.
Okay.
Corey?
And I guess similar to Lynn in some ways, in the town of Montague, I never get any calls on internet because the town has fiber op. However, outside the town is where I get all the phone calls, and I know maybe this is a question everyone gets, and I know it's hard to answer sometimes, and I know I've talked to Maigan about it a number of times, but it's a typical, people look at the map where they're laying the fiber up, of course, right? And it goes, Bell runs it this far down a road, and then they stop, and then the other 30 homes on the road, how come I don't get the fiber up? Why'd they stop there? We're giving them all these taxpayers dollars, and I don't get fiber up, but my neighbor does. But if the 30 of us want to come together and each put in money to that project, they'll lay fiber up, but my neighbor didn't have to pay anything. Do you how do I explain that to a constituent when they call and tell me that?
Well, and really, this is where we're hoping that wireless play will, and I get that people have a little bit of a hesitancy, but the wireless play that we do have will meet those CRTC guidelines. And certainly when we look at, particularly for residential customers, typically a 25 meg service will do what most people need most of the time. So once we have the wireless rollout, in particular for that big project, having 50/10 speed through Bell or 110 speed through Explorenet will meet their needs. So I know that there is a bit of a preference there, that people do like the assurances that you get with a fiber, but that the wireless service will certainly provide well above what the CRTC guidelines are, particularly for that Explorenet one that we are funding.
Corey?
So I guess I should say to them, just hang in there. Wireless is coming.
That will make you popular, I'm sure. And certainly we fully appreciate the situation that you're in when these questions come in. There is patience required on these bigger projects. We've looked at a million ways that we could accelerate them. But really we keep coming up against that capacity thing. So once these projects have rolled out, I'm confident that, like I said, that 95% of islanders through those two projects will see well above CRTC guidelined speed. We're committed to working on that additional 5% to make sure islanders do have access, but it may be in a different format than what their first choice would be, just given their location.
Corey?
And so when they do call me, or they keep calling me, and they ask, well, why did they stop there? I guess, do I say, well, that was Bell Line's decision, that's where they put in that they were going to stop, or how do I explain that to them?
They would have been decisions made by Bell when they were putting their proposal together on where it made sense economically to put fiber as the option. And some of that is based on where their locations currently are. Some of it may be based on the infrastructure that's already in place in terms of power poles, et cetera. But yeah, it was the designing that Bell would have done when they first put in their request.
Corey?
And this is one that I was actually dealing with Maigan on this week. A constituent that I think there was like 6 or 7 homes on the road that wasn't getting, I think fiber op was that, and Eastlink said, well, the cost to put it there would be 10,000. So divide that by 6 people and you get whatever per resident. But I think they could possibly be eligible for funding under, there's so many of them I can't even keep track of them, but.
Under the broadband
Under
fund,
the
yeah, we
broadband
could certainly
fund.
look to fund 50% of that cost of the
Because
project.
I think the constituent's point was that, well, they could each apply under the residential and get up to $5,000 each to improve the wireless. But if you took 6 of them, times that by 5, you'd be spending 30,000 on that, where if we just gave Eastlink 10,000, they would run fiber up to them. I thought it was a good point. Maybe I'm not, that's probably, there's probably more to it than that, but I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I will say, and I don't know the specifics of this particular case, but, where there is wireless access, and, that is the most economical choice, and we would look to how we could support them in that, if they all needed tripods on their roof, or, what the case may be. But, certainly if they want to put forward a project, we can look at that under the existing broadband fund, and, certainly for those white spot areas that we're still looking at how we can serve them, we'll look at what mechanisms we do have on that as well.
Corey?
Or I could say, hang in there, wireless is coming.
Depends on how patient your constituents are.
Satellite.
And one thing I'll just add to that is with the residential stream, it is up to $5,000. And the reason we chose that amount is we want to make sure that anyone who's looking to access the program has equal access. Most of the time, the infrastructure required is not at the $5,000 mark. For example, if someone just needed a tripod, you're looking at a few $100s, or a tower is perhaps $800 plus the installation. So just wanted to clarify that, even though it is up to the $5,000, I do understand where residents are coming from, but the majority of the equipment that would be needed would be less than that amount.
Corey?
And I understand that. And I just want to say, Maigan, you've been a huge help anytime I've called with constituents that have internet issues or seeking clarification on the different programs. I appreciate all your help. Thank you.
My pleasure. I hope that you won't have all the questions moving forward as these projects roll out. But for now, we know that we're doing our best to try to get everyone connected. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. Just a final question. I was hoping you could help me get a sense of what the timeline we are looking at for this final 5% of houses.
That is an excellent question. We're really hoping over the course of the winter that we'll be able to spend some time looking at both kind of the accelerated stream and also have some more details from that Bell Wireless project. And, like I said, after we kind of do those propagation studies and have all those details, we'll be looking at kind of where our problem spots are in particular once all that's in place. Like I said, I know there will be some of those individual pockets of 1 or 2 or 3 houses, and we can look at other mechanisms to support them. But once we have that full map, we'll really look at what capacity we need to put in play, and we may look at doing another request for proposals or something for solutions for those particular areas. But certainly over the winter, that's when we'll be looking at what those solutions really are. And I guess it's November now, so December, January, February, we'll be looking at what those remaining pockets are and what solutions we can potentially put in place to serve those areas.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. Would it be safe to say that by the spring you would have an idea of the timeline of what it would be to service?
I will certainly aim to at least have a timeline by that point. It'll really be based on what the solution ends up being before people can be hooked up, but certainly we'd have an update by next spring on what that will look like.
Lynn? Okay. Ernie?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And first of all, I will echo Corey's comments. Maigan, you have been fantastic. Really have appreciated. Just one question. Under the residential stream, in order to qualify, is there a cutoff as far as what your existing upload and download speeds are?
We decided to stay away from giving very specific requirements on that. The typical customer that we'd be looking at would be somebody who's currently on long line DSL, and typically they would experience a lot of challenges with their speed. So basically, we had said we would be looking at people who could improve their speed with this type of a solution. So rather than giving kind of hard cutoffs of what was eligible or not in terms of speeds, which, I mean, in some cases can vary depending on the time of day that they do the test, that rather than being, strict and prescriptive on that, that we would be a little bit more flexible and just say, this is for people to access improved speeds, whether people aren't typically looking to go from a fiber service of 1 gig to down to a 25 meg service with this. It was really trusting that Highlanders at this point are looking to improve their own service.
Ernie?
Glad to hear that. That's all. Thank you, Chair.
I have a couple of questions. The Rural Broadband Fund, I know that in its original form was quite underused, and I'm wondering what the changes have been to that program and what the uptake has been since those changes were made.
So with the accelerated stream, was that about 950,000 that we've allocated under that project? So that would be part of kind of that $2 million annual fund that we do have. So, I mean, at this point, it's been allocated for those particular projects. They haven't been paid out yet because they will be paid out as they draw claims. And then we've now been about 300,000 on that residential access stream through that fund as well. So between that and the business projects that we've had, we are kind of at that $2 million mark already. And as Maigan had mentioned earlier, we actually did go back to our Innovation PEI contingency fund that was put in place as part of COVID-19 to get more funds for that residential access stream so that we could continue to support Islanders and hopefully have them hooked up should we get to a second wave or more people need to be working from home.
Okay. And would this fund cover households who have extra costs to getting hooked up, like if they have a really long driveway or something like that? Does this fund cover that?
We haven't covered that particular issue yet. We haven't had anybody come in with that particular issue to us. But really that's where we've looked at that residential access program, that for people who needed additional equipment, but that in particular would be for more of a wireless service as opposed to running fiber to their home directly.
Okay. And so will the Rural Broadband Fund program be used to fill all the gaps that are kind of left by the Bell and Explorenet projects?
Not necessarily, and I will say it's the PEI Broadband Fund, so it's not specific to just rural PEI, though it would be largely accessed by rural PEI. So we may be able to leverage some federal funds as well, for instance, through the Infrastructure Fund or CRTC or some of the other federal streams. So certainly over the course of the winter, when we're looking at those remaining pockets, we will look to see what federal funds we may be able to leverage for projects.
Okay. Thank you. Any other? Heath?
Up there, just in your contract on the progress reporting, is there somewhere where that is actually online or anything from the some of the milestones the companies are reaching that may explain some of the questions that we had today as far as exactly how many people are, like the 4,000, that's great, but the applications that you talked about as far as the 5,000 residential and how many, when those click on, like is there somewhere that we can see or the public can see that progress?
So to date, we haven't done them in the form of progress reports, as in publishing a document, but in this case, we'd be dealing with Bell and their rollout. So we do on that internet plan page for each of those communities, there's a map and a list of civic addresses, and as those are turned on, we do update that web page so that, for instance, for Tignish and Surrey, once those projects were completed, we do have them listed as completed, and you'll be able to see the full list of civic addresses that are covered by those projects.
Heath?
So are the companies to date meeting the requirements set out in the contract?
To date, they've been meeting ours. We are a little bit limited in Explorenet that they haven't, we haven't hooked customers up yet, so there really isn't, from that consumer perspective, reports for us to publish. I don't know, from the funding perspective, Paul, if you have anything to add?
No issues on our side. They're meeting the requirements of the program as we set out in the funding agreements. So they propose to do it over a series of years. They update us at our request every few months on progress and forecast claims going forward. It's remaining fairly steady as far as their original plan versus what's rolling out.
Heath?
So how much money has been dispersed to these companies to date?
For the Bell and Explorenet, not very much to date. With Explorenet, I don't believe we've reimbursed any. They have a claim in. They know they need more supporting paperwork for that, so we're waiting on that. It's not really an issue. It's just they have time. They're gonna get that to us. Bell has submitted a number of claims. Some have been paid. I don't have the number on me right now, but one thing I'll say is claims progress. So that is when they do the work, they submit a claim. We go through it, we verify it, we process it, we pay out the federal and provincial portions, and then seek reimbursement from the federal government for their share. Claims often lag far behind the work being done. The companies, with all projects we find, are keen to get the work done and work on the bills and getting them in later. They know they're going to get their money. We're reliable funding partners. So often the claims come quite late. So I fully expect the work is well in advance of what the claims we've been seeing so far.
Heath?
So just on the funding source, on the $5,000 for the residential, where's that actually coming from? Is that coming from innovation, or is that coming from TIE or the infrastructure?
For the residential one, that's part of the PEI Broadband Fund that we have, so it would be coming out of Innovation PEI. Transportation, Infrastructure, and Energy is solely focused on that those Bell and Explorenet contracts. That's the funding arrangement that they have through the Infrastructure Fund.
Heath?
And what, on that $5,000 residential, what are the impediments that would likely not allow someone to hook up or make it complicated or something? Like, what are you seeing? Like, what's the reasoning behind? You said you had a lot in the queue. There's obviously been some turned down, so I'm just wondering, do you know why the reason?
So in terms of impediments, one of the things from an infrastructure perspective, there actually needs to be wireless signal that they can hook onto. So in some areas, putting up a tower won't help you because you need to have the wireless signal kind of in your area. So that, in terms of service, would be a challenge. In terms of the processing, one of the things that we had put in place for this particular program was basically kind of pre-approving anybody up to $500. So if it's a tripod on your roof and somebody comes to hook you up and they say, I need to put a tripod on your roof, it's going to cost you $300, but you can get it back from government. They can submit a claim to us with a copy of their invoice or their receipt so that we know that it's a legitimate expense and we would reimburse them. For anything that's above that threshold, we do require a technical review. So we have internal staff that will just make sure that it actually is a viable solution for that particular residential property, because we don't want people just putting up towers if it's not going to actually improve their service. And so that may be where we have a little bit of a backlog, that it does create, there is a process that we have to follow, but we are approving people relatively quickly. We may have people, and I say relatively quickly, within about a week or two for those technical reviews. We do have some people who have gone in through an inquiry form, but they need to follow up with the service providers themselves to get a quote so that then we can approve it. I think that is where we're experiencing most of the lag, is that they do need to receive a quote from a service provider to say, this is what we can do for your property to give you access to wireless signal, and then we can move on to the approval process. If that answers your question more or less.
Well, thank you.
Ola?
Thank you. Well, it's great to see all the work that's being done. If I understand it right, you're pumping in millions and millions of federal and provincial dollars, but you're really only hoping and praying that the competitive forces out there will keep the actual cost in line for the users. There's no connection between what you put in and expectations for more competitive prices.
One thing that I will say is in the service delivery agreement is that, and that would be for the Bell and Explorenet contracts, that there has to be continuity between urban service and rural service in terms of the price that you pay. So, as a for instance for Bell Fiber, that the expectation is that somebody in downtown Charlottetown would be paying the same price for that service as somebody who recently was hooked up in Tignish or Surrey. But in terms of setting the prices that they can pay, that's not something we currently have any regulatory ability to do in PEI.
Ola?
Well, I'm glad that you equalize city and country, so I may grump about my $100 a month or whatever it is I pay, but at least it will help, presumably, getting service to the countryside. So I understand in some places they have free internet service, like campgrounds was mentioned, as well as libraries. Has there been any consideration to provide, like, building coverage to, for instance, low-income housing, or as an example of a place where that kind of service would be really helpful for the life of the occupants there?
So, we are looking at some of those hotspots that we may be able to offer, similar to kind of a library service or whatnot. So we are looking at a couple of different models on that, but in terms of, a large scale, no fee service that we would be offering, that's not something that we've currently had discussions on kind of that fee side of things.
Ola?
So are you worried about you're coming at the internet from so many angles, which is a good thing? Are you worried about sort of that they overlap, that there's that you're sort of stepping into an area, say, where there's already somebody providing something, and then you're spending another $5,000 to getting something else hooked up? Or are you sort of are you looking at each individual thing as getting the most for your money?
No, I think that's absolutely a fair point. And, part of what we're looking at now over the course of the winter, like I said, is really where are those white spots, where are those gaps, moving forward. We're, like I said, relatively confident with the Bell and Explorenet projects, and then in addition with the accelerated stream projects that we're rolling out with this fall. We're going to cover most of PEI with those, but we really want to zero in with the next phase of our funding to either kind of supporting our local ISPs so that they can be competitive and offer consumer choice, or, like I said, on those areas where we know that there are white spots, and really focusing on what solutions we can put into those particular areas so that we're not just, repeatedly rebuilding on areas where we know there's already good coverage.
Ola?
Thank you. Technology, of course, is moving very fast and way beyond what I understand myself, like 5G is coming, and satellites. To what extent are you considering future talked about technologies like 5G? Will the investment in the infrastructure be able to handle that?
A lot of what we're looking at right now, certainly with the Bell and Explorenet, is scalability. So I'm quite confident in those particular projects. But then, as you kind of mentioned, there are some wild cards out there in terms of, satellite dramatic improvements or purported dramatic improvements on that type of service. So as some of those projects roll out, we certainly hope that we can leverage those as best we can in PEI so that we have that service for Islanders. But with these types of technology games, it's, it is always kind of that constantly evolving piece, and trying to make sure that we are as on top of it as we can be, so that Islanders can be competitive and our industries can be competitive.
Ola?
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff.
I just had one more quick question to kind of tack on to the PEI Broadband Fund that I was asking about earlier, when we were talking about that program perhaps filling the gaps left at the end. And I'm wondering, is there enough money in that project to ensure that we get to that point?
It depends on what the solutions end up being at the end of the day. So for right now, certainly last year we were going out and looking at different ways that we could accelerate projects, because we weren't seeing a lot of uptake in that fund. So if you had asked me 6 months ago, based on, what was left in the fund, I would have said there was lots of money left in the fund, but that's why we are continually evaluating it, so that we can be funding projects that will improve access for Islanders. When we look at some of those next stage projects, I suspect the Broadband Fund will be part of that solution, but like I said, we would always try and leverage what federal programs we do have in place. I suspect any one of those projects would be at a level that we'd have to go back to Treasury Board for approval, and potentially Cabinet for approval as well. So if we did need additional funds in that pot for those types of projects, we would have to go through those approval processes to obtain those funds.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? No? All right. Well, thank you very much for coming in. I think it's safe to say it was a very interesting presentation and lots of questions. So thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to seeing how things unfold. So we'll take a little recess and come back in a couple of minutes. Great. Thank you. All right, welcome back. We only have a couple of more things on the agenda to get through today. For scheduling, as we know, the House opens again next week, and wondering, we had started working on our report to the Legislative Assembly before COVID. And so wondering how the committee feels about meeting next Tuesday on the 10th to talk about the report. Is that something that you're interested in doing? Would you rather wait until later to get a feel for what you're thinking?
That's a week when the House opens and days when we're here.
The day the House opens, right? Tuesday?
Thursday.
Thursday, yeah.
Yeah. Ernie?
I can't, Caroline books for today, but just for me.
Well, we have the public accounts on the 10th, so.
I'm just laughing because it'd probably be me.
And there's a chair meeting as well.
There's a chair meeting on the Tuesday.
On Tuesday,
That's at 12?
12. So we'd have to be in the morning.
There's public accounts in the morning.
Sorry, just to hop in, it would probably be at like 2 or 2:30 if we were to meet that afternoon.
Oh, do we have something too? Okay, good to know.
Give it a couple weeks, I guess.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like we might want to wait a little bit. All right.
Could we meet,
Lynn?
thank you, Chair, when the House is sitting, can we meet over recess of 5 to 7 to have a quick discussion about what should be included in our report?
Yeah. Everybody agree with that? Awesome. Okay.
Thanks, Chair.
Excellent. Anybody have any new business? No? All right. Can I get a motion to adjourn? Corey, so moved.